Welcome to the Fighting for Civil and Disability Rights Strategies to Overcome Barriers, which is part 3 in our human experience of Black people with disabilities and their rights under the ADA. My name is Emily Malsh. I am with the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center. We are one of 10 ADA centers that are across the country that make up the ADA National Network. So I believe at this time, I am going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to pass it over to our MC for today, Johnny with Bailey Media Group. Johnny, go ahead.
Thanks, Emily. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the human experience of Black people with disabilities and their rights. This session is titled Fighting for Civil and Disability Rights: Strategies to Overcome Barriers. This is part 3 of our our 4-part series, unlocking the learnings from this very, very meaningful research study. My name is Johnny Bailey. I am an education consultant with the ADA. I help companies like Google, Amazon, and the ADA design education programs for marginalized communities. I'm joining here from Washington, D.C. In the chat, please let us know what city you're tuning in from. With me today are my colleagues, Anne Deschamps and Banu Priya Moturu, who have been key contributors to this initiative. I'll first go to Anne to share more about her background and why this study is so important. Anne?
Thank you, Johnny. I'd like to say welcome everyone to part 3 of the human experience of Black people with disabilities, fighting for civil and disability rights. As director of the ADA Center, I'm really proud of the research we've done. In 2021, the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center, along with our research partner, the University of Maryland, launched a research study to better understand how Black Americans with disabilities access information about their rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And through conversations across the region, we gathered meaningful insights into the experience of the participants, with particular focus on the intersection of race and disability, an area that has been underexplored in research. This 4-part webinar series was created to share and build upon what we learned. To explore the study and its findings, please visit our website at adainfo.org and click on research. Fighting for civil and disability rights has been the center of the disability rights movement and a topic we will explore today. And with that, I will turn things over to Johnny to guide us in today's discussion. Johnny?
Thanks, Anne. Let's next go to Banu for a quick introduction, and she'll be our co-moderator for today, so I'm really excited.
Thank you, Johnny. Hi, everyone. My name is Banu Priya Moturu. I'm an assistant professor at New Mexico State University. My research focuses on workplace disparities at the intersection of race, gender, culture, and disability. And I'm thrilled to be part of this important discussion today. I am an Indian woman with long dark hair, and I'm wearing a green blazer. I'm smiling and excited to be here. As an Indian international, I also want to acknowledge that I do not carry the lived experiences of being Black in the US. I come to this conversation as a learner and a facilitator with respect for many Black leaders like Anita, whose voices we are centering today. On to you, John.
Wonderful. And last but not least, we have our special guest, Miss Anita Cameron, who is a disability justice activist who has been involved in social change activism and community organizing for over 42 years. Anita, thank you for being here. Please tell us a bit more about yourself.
Well, thank you very much. Let me give a quick visual description. I am a Black person with caramel colored skin, have a very long grain locks, and am wearing today a lime green t-shirt with purple lettering. It is an ADAPT t-shirt, and so you have the ADAPT logo says free our people. It's a wheelchair figure breaking chains. It is the last um, action that I was on. And so it says 40 years and continuing March 4th, roll on, National ADAPT. Church significant to me because it was my last National ADAPT action before I retired. So, a little about me. I am 60 years old, living in Rochester, New York. But I was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois, and was born on Chicago's South Side, in a neighborhood uh, known for where the Black Panthers had their children's breakfast program. Um, we then moved further south, where my dad was the first Black person to own property on that block. He bought a small apartment complex. Now, when I was a kid, disabled children, and I was born in 1965, too late to participate in the civil rights movement for Black folks. And I feel guilty for that. And so at the age of 9, I made this vow, if you will, that I would work to make the world a better place for everyone. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know, I had no idea what that meant. I was an idealistic child, um, who saw things around me. I was born with multiple disabilities, um, born a twin. My twin sister was 4 hours ahead of me. Our birthdays are literally different days. My mom had no idea she was having twins, fairly common back in 1965. She was able to get to a hospital where I was born, where I almost died at birth. And in the effort to save my life, gained other disabilities. Oh well. When I was born, disabled children had no right to an education. What saved me was that I was so-called gifted. And so I was mainstream from preschool through university. At the age of 10, the act that would become the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act passed. Also during that time, the 1973 Rehabilitation Act, in this act, several historic things were going on when I was a child, including what really was the first national adapt action, the Gang of 19, held on the southwest corner of Colfax and Broadway. That would be historic to me. I would end up living, probably less than 7 blocks away. And that intersection is where I caught my buses. And after all of that hard work, they finally named the station for Wade. And so at the age of 16, I got involved in the social justice, social change movement. I worked in peace and justice. I worked in anti-apartheid. I worked, with justice for houseless people, immigration rights, LGBTQ, and then disability rights. Because as I was growing up, I had no disabled mentors. I had no disabled people to look toward. I wasn't raised around disabled. I wasn't raised in a segregated atmosphere and everything. My parents wanted me so much to be normal. And finally, at the age of 21, I ran into a group called ADAPT, and I found the disability rights movement, and I found a home, a home where a lot of the people looked like me. Seeing all those other movements, a lot of the people didn't look really like me in that I was often either the only Black or either the only disabled or both. And here it was, I found a movement where I was one of a bunch of Black disabled folks. And because ADAPT, which is at that time a new organization, was founded by folks who had marched with Dr. King, and some of its first members were Black Panthers and all of that. There was this liberatory spirit. We were like a family, and we wound up doing some amazing things together.
Lovely. Thank you for that very contextual story about your upbringing. I think it really helps set the stage for who you are and why this work as a disability justice advocate and activist is really, really important. So I look forward to diving in a little bit deeper and asking some questions about your journey, some of your personal experiences in this work, and then obviously strategies that we can use to protect ourselves and move the ball forward, so to speak. So let's cover the agenda. Today's session is broken down into 4 sections. First, we will briefly cover Know Your Rights under the ADA. Banu will handle that. Then we will move into our fireside chat with Anita, followed by a webinar survey that will be conducted by our lovely participants. And then we'll dive into audience Q&A with Anita. So I know many of you have questions now or will have questions throughout the fireside chat. Feel free to drop those questions in the chat. We will have our team who will be collecting those questions, and then I, myself, or Banu will moderate those questions on your behalf to Anita to answer them. Sound good? Great. So let's jump in. Banu, help us understand and know our rights under the ADA. What do we need to know here?
Thank you, Johnny. This one was us talking about briefly sharing the findings from the research study that that Mid-Atlantic ADA Center conducted in collaboration with University of Maryland, and I was a part of it when I was at University of Maryland, and now I'm at NMSU. So I'll briefly share the findings, and that is what prompted the webinar series that we are doing today as well. So nearly 35 years after the passage of the ADA, Black people with disabilities continue to experience some of the starkest disparities in employment, healthcare, education. So this study explored the barriers Black and disabled individuals face in understanding and exercising their rights and the strategies they use to overcome them. So across 4 focus groups with 50 participants that were recruited from Centers for Independent Living, we identified 7 major themes. And they are understanding and accessing rights, where many participants knew what their rights were, but felt that those rights were not being honored. Sources of information is the second theme, where people often had to self-educate or rely on advocacy groups because information was not readily accessible in their communities. Identity and belonging was the third theme, where participants talked about navigating race, disability, and sometimes gender, and created complex identity struggles and wanting a sense of belonging. The fourth theme was discrimination and marginalization. Racism, ableism, ageism compounded the barriers across work, healthcare, education. Participants also shared about restricted access to supports, where even when requesting accommodations, people were frequently denied or told resources weren't available. This webinar today is focusing on the sixth theme, which is ongoing need for advocacy, where participants describe disability rights and as a continuous fight requiring both individual and collective advocacy. And the last theme was about accommodations and supports people received, where while some positive examples existed, they were often the result of relentless self-advocacy. So these findings are what led us to create this 4-part webinar series. And each session focuses on a theme that participants told us was most urgent, with advocacy and collective action at the center of today's webinar. So that theme is exactly what brings us to Anita today. Her decades of leadership and civil disobedience exemplify the kind of persistence and courage participants told us is needed. So with that in mind, I would like to begin our conversation with the first question to Anita. Anita, you were part of the historic 1990 Capitol crawl that pushed for the passage of the ADA. Can you tell us about your experience being part of the Capitol crawl, and what do you think made that action so impactful?
I remember the Capitol crawl as if it were yesterday. I remember that it was hot and sunny. I remember that there were hundreds of us there. I remember that people like Justin Dart and Michael Winter and other members of the disability community, but kind of like the more, shall we say, policy-minded, polished folks um, spoke of the need for the ADA, spoke of the rejection of second-class citizenship. Um, and I remember that at a signal, and because I really couldn't see Mike Allberger but he gave a signal, and people began to get out of their chairs or put their canes and things aside and go up the Capitol steps. So I started out at the time. I was walking. I had, as I've said before, I have very low vision, and so I had my tactile cane with me. And I started out carrying my friend Frank McComb's wheelchair. And Frank McComb was a friend of mine from Denver who had been in a nursing home for 43 years and had just lived through horrific abuse and all, but finally was out, and had been out in the community, living his life and doing things, and he was participating. And so I started out pulling up his wheelchair up those steps backwards. And the wheelchair was heavy. I recalled that, goodness, it's a manual wheelchair. This is heavy. And so I gave his wheelchair off to a person who was one of our PCAs, one of our personal care attendants. And then I went up the steps backwards on my butt. And as I went up, I was saying hello to various people. I know anybody who's seen footage has seen the footage of little Jennifer Keelan making her way up the steps. I passed her by and said hello. You don't see that in the footage. Um, the thing that I did note, and the media bias still exists, the media didn't take very many pictures of the Black folks who were there. And there were many of us there. or they took pictures of the same young woman in different poses or different points as she was going up the stairs, or when she had the sign on her back and when she didn't, and kind of pushed it off as different people. In fact, um, I was mistaken to be that person, and I said no. I remember being happy, honored that I was um, allowed to participate, because a lot of the focus back then, ADAPT wasn't always a cross disability organization, if you will. We've always been, but it wasn't always recognized. And I think that, and also back then, if you had hidden disabilities, but you walked, oftentimes, this still happens these days, those were the people perceived as leaders. And those are the people that the media will go up to or police will go up to in negotiations and all. And so, as an effort to get um, people to interact, with everyone, those of us with more significant support needs, those of us who use wheelchairs and all, were pushed forward, and rightfully so, so that, all of us got a chance, to speak and be at the table and all. But, back then, I was a little thing. I mean, on that day, I was 24. Um, and so this was 1990. I joined ADAPT in 1986. So I was not the Anita then that you know now. And I was I was like glad and feeling lucky that I was allowed to participate. As I was going up those steps, I was thinking, I know that what we're doing is historical. I felt like we were crawling into history. I knew that this was a part of history. Something in me told me that they would be talking about this 20, 30 years from now, but that this is what we needed to do. This crawl up the Capitol, was that component was designed by ADAPT. And we felt that we needed to do this, to highlight that, we couldn't go where everyone could go, to highlight our second class citizenship, that, in this day and age, that, we are still, forced to, be, to do things like this or to exist as second class citizens. So I felt that in us doing this, that we were crawling into history. But as much as we talk about the Capitol crawl, we don't really talk much about the day after, which was the Rotunda takeover. And it was that action that I believe that moved the politicos. The Capitol crawl moved the public, if you will, moved the media, if you will, moved other disability. The Rotunda takeover moved the politicians. And it started out as a tour of the Capitol. It was a fake tour of the Capitol, something that adapted design. And as we were going, around, and they were showing us when we got to the Rotunda, that was where things stopped. The chanting began, the chains and everything came out. Our voices reverberated throughout the Capitol buildings. Members of Congress, including the Speaker of the House, and all came in, trying to talk to us and placate us, as we're screaming, ADA now, access is a civil right, and banging and canes and things. And we were already in kind of concentric circles, as you will. And there were those of us who had chained ourselves together. I wound up in a knot of people in the very center of the group who had chained their wheelchairs together, and those of us who were not in wheelchairs had chained and handcuffed ourselves to those who were in wheelchairs. And we were some of the last to be arrested. And obviously with the members of Congress and Speaker Foley and Steny Hoyer and all of those coming in was not satisfying us. We felt that the ADA, it already failed before in 88. We felt that if it did not pass, we would be 3, 4, 30 years down the line trying to get the ADA. And so when the dust cleared, 104 of us were arrested. I was number 81. Depending on what group you were in, there were different consequences for us. I actually spent the night in jail over that.
Anita, thank you. Thank you for sharing history and sharing in terms of what was instrumental in the passage of ADA. As you mentioned, you spent a night in jail as you were part of the Capitol crawl, and you have risked arrest over 140 times in nonviolent civil disobedience. So how do you see, civil disobedience has been used around the world to bring about change. So how do you see direct action, protest, and civil disobedience fitting into today's disability rights struggles?
I feel that in this day and age, we have to be very careful and very deliberate in what we're doing. Back in the day, those of us with disabilities, we got whipped up, beat up by police and all. It did not matter who you were. And then we went through a long period, uh, of the police may not necessarily liking us, but respecting us, or the incidents of violence were far reduced. What I am afraid of is that things will go back to those days and worse. And so we have to prepare ourselves mentally and physically for that. I believe that direct action still has to play an important part. I think the thing that people don't realize about adapt is by the time you see an adapt action, an adapt protest, you've got to know that we've gone through all of the other steps, prongs on the advocacy pitchfork, if you will. We've gone through trying to educate, our targets, gone with trying to meet with them, gone with trying to do all of the nice folks or the regular forms and things of advocacy. When you see our protest, know that we have done everything we can, and we have no choice but to then use direct action and civil disobedience, because even history shows that it works. Adapt, stand, adapt is on the shoulders of the civil rights movement. And a lot of disability activity and all is on the shoulders of the disability rights movement. And then Dr. King himself learned, from Gandhi, and so, we have to know these days um, to continue to use it as a last resort, not a first resort, and know that even among the disability group, there are those of us with privilege and those of us with not. I think what a lot of us forget in even disability rights and advocating for yourself and all, what works for a lot of white folks with disabilities don't work for Black folks with disabilities and people of color and all. I'm here to tell you, been there, done that. I've had multiple experiences that show me that if you're Black, you're going to have less access to the advocacy methods. but then on the other hand, we're going to be in a situation so desperate that direct action is needed. And so in this day and age, we have to be prepared and safe because this day and age, you're not going to get off with a slap on the wrist. You're not going to get off with being processed. And even though that processing may have taken all day and into the night and into 5 and 6 and 7 o'clock in the morning, you knew once you were processed, you had your ticket, you were going to let go and all. You knew at the very worst, as an ADAPT member, you might spend 3, 4, 5, sometimes 10 days in jail. I spent 20 days in jail, but you knew you were going to get out. And you knew that you had recourse, some recourse for protection. We're not necessarily guaranteed that in this day and age. And I think that there is a method to it, if you will. It's meant that way. It's meant to silence activists, but we have to just be able to be prepared on a number of ways, um, that if we're going to do it, be creative, and just be prepared that um, things are going to be more like the 80s and early 90s as we are in 2005. Know that you may carry some terrorism charges. We never, that never happened to us. We got a lot of federal charges, many and plenty. We were called terrorist organizations, but we never got terrorism charges levied against that. Know that that may happen to you. It has happened already to many peaceful protesters. Know that you may be in the system of the jail where um, they're supposed to follow the ADA, but often don't. And so if you require medications, if you require durable medical equipment like wheelchairs, like, canes, like specialized equipment, know that you may be without that. And so all I'm saying is don't be afraid. You got to keep that courage. Just know that things are a whole lot different these days.
Anita, can I hop in here?
Sure.
So, uh, that was wonderful. And I want to ask just a production note. Would you mind moving your camera down just a little bit so we can see? There you are. I just want to make sure everyone can see you and hear
Oh,
you really, really clearly.
thank
Um,
you, Johnny.
no problem at
I
all.
didn't realize my computer had slipped down on my knees. There.
No worries. I'm here to help. So I want to talk about identity and belonging and kind of just double click on your point about the trailblazers that came before us. You obviously know the impact of Black disabled leaders in this struggle. And I'm a huge history buff and I care deeply about the pioneers and trailblazers that came before us because they struggled and sacrificed for us to be exactly where we are today, to give us the opportunity to push and make change for the next generation. Who are some Black disabled leaders that you think we should be honoring and learning from today?
Well, I mean, there are definitely a lot of us out there, now. We have our beloveds, like Claudia Gordon, um, Haben Girma. I think we need to remember our Black leaders that who may have passed on that people don't know, like Bobby Coward, who did so much in the DC area, was a vet, and all. Um, they're off the top of my mind. So many of them are rolling around. Um, names. I'm trying to get names to come to my tongue. because pictures are swirling in my head of some of these Black folks out there today. Well, you have Latoya Maddox. She's out there. She's an ADAPT member who is out there today that a lot of people don't know of her. But she's from Philadelphia and she's out there, doing her thing. Her and Dominique Howell, making waves in Philadelphia and on the national level.
You dropped some good names. I think folks can jot those notes down and look those people up. I also want to kind of pivot to your upbringing in Chicago. And you mentioned that you were born at a time where the Black Panthers were providing service and collaboration with the people there in Chicago. And I think specifically there was a collaboration with the disabled activists during the 504 sit-ins. Okay.
Well, the Black Panthers, see, a lot of people want to put that narrative out there. I want to make sure y'all see me. A lot of people want to put that narrative out there. Oh, the Black Panthers served the activists and all. The Black Panthers were part of that action. The Black Panthers are in the integral to that action. There were Black Panthers who were there, who went, Brad Lomax was there, Chris Jackson, people. Brad went to the meetings with Secretary Califano and all, started his own independent living center. Those Black Panthers were, integral. You know what I mean? They just didn't serve those white folks. They were part of that action. And that's what we need to remember. They were every bit a part of that action as those other activists were. They did not just collaborate and feed folks.
Oh,
Um, yeah, and it's been like that from jump. It hasn't. The Black Panthers are I told you some of the early members of ADAPT were Black Panthers. Ernest Taylor out of Connecticut. you know. And so we had members of the Black clergy was part of my, so we had Reverend Willie Smith. He had his whole family and his kids. Because see, ADAPT had kids too. We had children born in ADAPT, grown up. And I'm talking Black children too. We had a little Black baby out of Rochester. His first action, he was six months old, being pulled in a red wagon. Brian Johnson. Today, Brian is 25 years old, living his life and all. And he's one of several Black children who grew up in the DAP and learned and went on to become advocates themselves. When I was a kid in Chicago, we didn't have that because unfortunately, there was a lot of ableism existed in our community. Unfortunately, that was the way it was. And so a lot of Black activists, disabled activists, we got together on our own. Now, there were some activists. I was friends and ADAPT members with the Baker family. And so Miss Lillian, she was my foster mom's colleague. They taught at a segregated disabled school called Spalding High School in Chicago. And they were teachers together. Now, my foster mother had wanted nothing to do with ADAPT or anything disability and cussed me out when I joined. But the Bakers and Charlie, their son, who used the wheelchair, they were all in. But it was like we had to come together on our own. There weren't organizations of Black disabled out there getting out, that information. A lot of our meetings were by accident. Either we went to the same segregated school in the case of Miss Baker and all, or we fell into the movement like me. And so when I was joining ADAPT and seeing us being so diverse and so, and seeing, like I said, little Black kids and Black teenagers growing up in the DAP and learning, and all. And it's still happening, but that was the way it was for a lot of us Black folks. We
Anita?
had to forge our own.
Anita, my follow-up question is related to what you were sharing and what you shared about the media bias and lack of visibility of Black leaders and Black individuals with disabilities in previous movements. And in our study, participants stressed the importance of collective advocacy too. So what are some concrete ways Black individuals with disabilities can build collective power today?
Well, I think that we need to. Can you see me? Something?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
I don't know if something's happening on my end or whatever. Um, we need to introduce ourselves as Black disabled. We need to be cross movement. We need to really deal with things from a disability justice framework. As we are introducing and other movements and joining together, then we're learning from each other, right? We're being taught. I think that we need to reach out more within other movements as we are, they need to not be so resistant, because that's a lot of, it's not for lack of trying, and so whether it's Black disabled or any other disabled. And so I believe that you were asking me about uh joining other kind of like cross movements.
Mhm.
No, and also you were telling me we were asking about like media bias and all and why as well, and the cross move, we really have to come together. We have to deal with the resistance. Media bias still exists. I'm going to tell you that literally the only proof I have that I was at the Capitol crawl and at the Rotunda takeover were the adapt pictures and videos, not anything that the media took. Um, and that's just, because the face of disability and all, whether to ourselves or even to the media, all is white. And that's who they're looking for. And if you can, you know, if you have clear speech and all and look pretty, all the better. But I believe that not only that we as Black disabled and disabled have to reach out to those other groups and insist and demand, those other groups have to stop seeing us as an afterthought. Like they have to, disability has to be thought of when you're thinking about liberation and all. I did a podcast with Push Black a few years ago called uh, If Black Liberation Doesn't Include Disabled, It Isn't Real Liberation. Because liberation and rights doesn't come with an asterisk, right? It doesn't come with um, all of us Black folks are liberated, including queer, but not those disabled. It doesn't come with that. No rights or justice. Well, rights leaves a lot of folks behind, but if you're talking about justice and inclusion and all, doesn't have an asterisk. And so we have to remember, and even in the disability, and even among us Black disabled, but in the wider world, we have to remember to include those that we don't normally think about.
Thank you,
Anita,
Anita, for that. You mentioning about solidarity between racial justice movements, disability rights movement. It's like we have to come together, bringing in those intersectional identities and not look
Like
at.
environmental groups,
Mm.
indigenous folks groups, emergency preparedness groups. See, in my life, I take my disability with me. And so anything I get involved in, from voting uh, to emergency preparedness, you bring in disabled, and you collaborate so that you don't have to think about it. You know what I mean? And so, environmental groups need to be getting together. We need to be working with the folks on the res. We need to understand that the global south, things, are different, and really think about the folks that you don't think about and seek collaboration.
Anita, I want to ask one closing question before we move to the audience survey and the audience Q&A. You've accomplished an incredible amount of things and milestones, and you've certainly made a difference in your activist career. But I would love to ask you, what do you consider the proudest moment of your protest and activist career?
We were in the Cannon building in Washington, D.C., a bunch of us. And not far from where we were getting arrested was Congressman John Lewis's office. And Congressman Lewis got curious and he came down to see what was going on and saw us. He had the police stop the arrest process so that he could go through the crowd and talk to us and shake our hands. And when he passed me, I went to shake his hand. He gave me a hug, introduced myself to him, and he told me to keep on making that good trouble. And in my work with ADAPT, I've gotten to meet. I got to meet the grandson of Gandhi. I got to meet presidents. I was invited to the White House on 3 separate occasions. Got to meet 3 different presidents. Always got my hug from President Obama, even though I protested him and chained myself to his White House fence. I still got my hugs and sweetness from President Obama. President Bush did eventually shake my hand, even though he had to be forced to do it. I got to meet all kinds of iconic members of Congress that I worked with, that I knew on. I call Maxine Waters Auntie Maxine to her face because I sat out her staff in her office just to get her to sign on to a piece of legislation. And she came in and busted out her staff, and the next day signed on to that legislation. I had a number of proud moments. I was actually the hostess for the 2019 reintroduction of the Disability Integration Act, where we had members of Congress came, where Cory Gardner, who we fought about, who I've been arrested and dragged out his office, was the first Republican Senate sponsor of this and came and spoke, where my senator, Chuck Schumer, came and spoke and beamed at me speaking and leading this thing. So, I'm humbled and honored by all the opportunities that I've gotten, and the people, that I've met, even among, the Black community. I have a project. It's called We Were There Too, Blacks in the Disability Movement. And it highlights, those stories of those Black people you ain't never heard of, and remember, those Black folks, like Fannie Lou Hamer and Johnny Lacey and all those folks whose names we may not necessarily know, or we may not necessarily know have a disability. But my project is focusing those folks who were out in the trenches with me, who did so much. And Latanya Reed's story is up there. So we were there too. Blacks in the Disability Movement. We were there too.org.
Mm-hmm. Anita, we are proud, grateful, and inspired. Thank you so much for these powerful anecdotes and strategies that we can use to move the ball forward in disability, justice, and rights. I want to save some time for the audience Q&A, but before we do that, I want to encourage you all to quickly take our webinar survey to let us know how our session was today. If you learned something, if you would like to see something different going forward, please scan the QR code on the next slide and you'll be able to provide your feedback. After that, we'll then go into our Q&A. share some additional resources on what's to come and how you can connect with the Mid-Atlantic ADA. So here is the QR code for our webinar survey. Please complete this webinar evaluation. We'll have someone from our team. Emily just dropped the link to the survey in the chat. So if the QR code is not accessible for you, you are welcome to click the link in the chat to access that survey. We'll give you all a few seconds to at least pull that survey up as a new tab and get started. It takes about 2 or 3 minutes to complete, very, very short and direct. And as you all are completing that, we'll then shortly transition over to our Q&A from the audience. Some of the feedback that we're getting in the chat, Anita, you are truly amazing and have empowered me to not be ashamed of my disability. You are very familiar.
Wow, thanks. And now that I'm on my phone, if any of you can kind of see that background is the still from a video of the Capitol crawl, and you can see me carrying someone's wheelchair up along with another person. But thank you.
So I'll jump in with our first question as moderator from our audience. This question is regarding overcoming barriers for folks who are at the intersection of Black, disabled, and housing insecure. What strategies can we use to advocate for and support Black disabled adults experiencing housing insecurity and Black disabled K through 12 students who are homeless or unstably housed?
I think this, Anita, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I think that, word of mouth travels a lot. If you can band together and then start visiting or calling these organizations in mass, find out why your local housing authority is allowing some of that, a lot of this to happen. A lot of people don't realize most cities have their own city, like here in Rochester, we have RHA, Rochester Housing Authority. They're over a lot of this hood housing and whatnot. I say get involved in your city hall. Every city I live in, I show up at city hall. I make city hall and the mayor know who I am. Those meetings are open to the public. Find out, they're usually at city hall, find out, figure out the Zoom and whatnot, and go as a group. I think a lot of times those of us in the Black community, we don't realize that these are things that we can do, because they're not out here letting us know. You could show up at city halls. When I first came to Rochester, I made myself so known to our mayor. I had his cell phone number and we were on a first name basis. I made him make sure that we had snow removal, in the city. I made him, me and the center I work for, we got together with the mayor because he had promised he was going to, address the snow issue. And so we said no. And we put him out there in a wheelchair in the snow. You experience it for yourself. Experience it what it's like to have to ride in a dinghy wheelchair in the middle of the doggone street. Now, usually these types of exercises I don't necessarily care for, but we felt that the mayor needed to know, and he actually doubled and it came out because of a letter to the editor that involved me. I wrote a letter to the editor and all of this, and the mayor remembered his promise. And our center was full of Black folks, and we just got out there and showed them. And so, the snow budget got doubled in Rochester because we didn't want to see any more disabled people hurt and killed in the street because you're not shoveling the snow. So it's a matter of getting together. Them people that if you know you live in a specific project or whatnot, you know, form a tenants association, join a tenants association. You got to make yourself heard and don't be afraid and don't let them ignore you because they'll try to gaslight you and everything. Come up with, demands, concerns, and all, and put them out there and do it. But you know what? You don't need a bunch of people to do it. All it takes is one. I've been there, done that. I know for a fact if you can get a bunch of people, fine. All it takes is one.
Mm, mm. I think we have time for about two more questions. Banu, do you have a question you'd like to moderate?
Yes, thank you, Johnny. Anita, one of our participants here wanted to know where they can find groups representing Latino disability communities or larger BIPOC advocacy groups. Are you aware of any groups that you can share with our audience today?
I know that the El Paso, Texas chapter of ADAPT is almost totally Latina. Get up with Josue Rodriguez. I'll get if y'all have my email, let me know. I know a number of Yolanda Vargas. There are a number of folks out there working. The interim director of the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund is Michelle Uceta. So there are tons and tons of folks and groups out there. Let me know. I give you a plethora of them.
We have time for one last question. So much good feedback and praise for your story and testimony today, Anita. A question to close out. As someone who works in inclusive higher education, specifically within disability accessibility services, do you have any basic advice as to how to make disabled people of color feel immediately more welcome in these spaces?
Okay, I'm sorry. I missed that first part of the question because for some reason I was muted, but that was on my end.
Oh, no problem. So this question comes from someone who works in inclusive higher education, specifically within disability and accessibility services. And she's asking how to make disabled people of color feel more welcomed in these spaces.
In the first place, we have to make these spaces have disabled people of color on the ground in these spaces. Because a lot of these spaces don't have, they're, you know what I mean? And so we have to push to be part of these spaces so that the spaces are welcoming. We have to put ourselves out there. We have to educate ourselves and we have to make them, like I said, we can't let them gaslight us or disrespect us. And even if we're having bad experiences, we can't give up. We have to keep on doing it. Get up with me, my email. We can work together to get you some ideas and whatnot how to work on this. Okay, I'm more than happy to do that.
Wonderful. So, Anita, before we close out, how can people find you? I know that there's some folks that have some questions and would love to have some connections. Can you drop a way that people can reach you?
So I'm Anita Cameron 007 at gmail.com. ANITACAMERON 007 at gmail.com. I'm on Facebook and Insta. I'm on Twitter now as Anita Cameron 11. I've been putting out advocacy videos. Like I said, I have the project, we were there too.org. I also have author Anita Cameron, but the main way, Anita Cameron 007 at gmail.com.
Got it. There you have it. I hope you all took note and wrote that down. We will be following up with some details from this session. So if you didn't get it all today, here you will be able to collect the deck and some additional notes in a follow-up email. I want you all to be sure, if you enjoyed today's session with Anita, go ahead and sign up for part 4 of our webinar series, The Power of Visibility and Community Advocacy. This will be another 1 hour webinar with a special guest to be announced soon, moderated by myself and Banu. So we really invite you and excited to continue to explore and unpack this research study with you all. You can use the QR code here, or there should be a link in the chat. Can someone, Emily or Maynard, please drop the adainfo.org link so that folks can sign up in the chat. We really appreciate you all supporting this journey and attending to learn more about advocacy and the human experience of Black people with disabilities. As a quick reminder, the ADA National Network has 10 regional centers that provides guidance, training, and materials on the ADA. Information is such a valuable asset and resource, so we want to make sure that you all are aware of how to find it and can get to it when you need it most. So you see the information here, 1-800-949-4232 or adata.org. Thank you for joining us as well. And if you need to contact the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center specifically, if you are in this region, you can give us a call locally at 301-217-0124 or email us at adainfo@transcend.org. This has been a fantastic session. On behalf of Anne, Banu, and the ADA, the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center, we want to say thank you. Have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful week. Continue to advocate for yourselves and others. And we'll see you at part 4 on December 2nd. Thank you.